I am so friggin' worried about raising spoiled brats. And I grew up with one foot in the welfare bucket, and I'm proudly trailer trash. And I didn't have the opportunities that my kids have now. And I'll be damned if these kids aren't going to experience some plight in the world. And I'm not going to force them into poverty, but we need to be exposed to. We need to get rid of the SUVs and picket fences, and we need to become in our face, understanding that this world desperately needs us.
Another awesome episode with Erik Hatch. And I could tell you, we get into topics that we really haven't talked about on the show before, specifically centered around the human trafficking and the Sound of Freedom movie that has been on my mind recently and on my heart after I've seen it. I know Andrew saw it, and we have had a couple conversations around just the inhumanity that exists in the world around us. And Erik speaks to this, where he has raised over $5 million in charities, and how he tied his business's success into a servant leadership opportunity in his real estate space. It's a really unbelievable story that he shares about his trip to Haiti and just what he's experienced in his life. Super profound, very high energy. I think you're really going to love his wisdom. He brings a lot of tactical tools that you could use for your business. But what really stuck with me is just his servant heart as a family man with a business. And I'm truly blessed to have him on our show. Andrew, what were some of the highlights for you with Erik's episode before we get to it?
Yeah, I mean, Erik is the real deal. You're going to find that out here in just a minute. But he just strikes me as somebody who walks the walk and talks the talk, and is not afraid to put it, say it like he sees it, and to call you out and to challenge you, to go first, to lead, to speak up, to use your platform and to use your voice for good, which he very clearly is. And so you're really going to love this episode. He has so much wisdom to offer you. Let's get on with the show with Erik Hatch.
Also, he has a giveaway. I just want to make sure it's captured here. Be on the lookout for it. He's giving away his free book on Instagram. He has two awesome books that are out there. He's giving one away for free. So make sure you take a listen for that. I want to make sure that you capture the second book, The Perfect Real Estate Agent Blueprint, along with his first book that he's given away for free, Play for the Person Next to You. So be on the lookout for those. Get your pen and paper ready. Get on with the show with Erik Hatch. Welcome back to the Better Than Rich Show. I'm Mike Abramowitz. I'm here with Andrew Biggs and our guest today, Erik Hatch. Welcome to the show, Erik. How are you today?
Fellas, I am fantastic. It's a great day to be alive.
It is a good day. Feeling like better than rich today, Some days I feel rich, but today is one of those better than rich days. So, Erik, I want to dive right in because this has been top of mind for me. I actually did a Facebook Live recently. I know Andrew just saw The Sound of Freedom. I saw The Sound of Freedom. We went into a deep dive on, I know I did with the podcast episodes, Jordan Peterson's, Tony Robbins, Lewis Howes. I mean, just a lot of this content around Operation Underground Railroad. And I know you have helped raise funds regularly to fight human trafficking around the globe. Looks like you raised over $5 million, if I'm not mistaken, on that, on empowering countless other leaders and playing your part and just this movement and other charities and nonprofits. I mean, we're going to go in a lot of different directions between business and family and whatnot, but I want to start here because it's top of mind for me. How did you get kind of connected into raising these funds and this fighting this human trafficking? And I'd also like to hear your take on like the movie itself, assuming you saw it, and just anything that has to do with The Sound of Freedom and what is trying to be brought to the surface with this movie, with the topics and everything underneath that umbrella. So let me kick it to you. Whatever vein you want to go down would be awesome.
Well, in order to really paint the picture, we have to go back 20 or so years. I graduated from college and I live in Fargo, North Dakota, and was ready to take on the world. If you would have asked me 20 years ago what I wanted to do with my life, I would have said I wanted to be a motivational speaker, which is kind of a weird thing for a 22-year-old to say. But nonetheless, I felt called and inspired to try to make a difference. And my church that I was baptized and raised in brought me in, and I was able to start my career as a professional. And I spent about 10 years in the ministry. I got my I went full time into real estate, which is what I do now. I do business coaching and consulting, and I run a real estate team as well. I got into real estate full time in 2011 while I was doing ministry and that sort. But during my ministry, I was an entrepreneur in a place where I had 4,000 bosses. It was really, it was something. And one of those bosses had said to me as I was sending kids out, and we would do mission trips all over the world, and they're like, "Hey, what about the people in our own backyard?" And I'm like, "Absolutely. What about the people in our own backyard?" And so I started a movement with my church called Homeless and Hungry. It was a 30-hour simulation of being homeless. And so in October in North Dakota, we fasted for 30 hours. We slept outside in cardboard boxes. You could only have the clothes on your back, no cell phones, no toothbrush, no anything. So people are hungry. They go to worship and they serve, and we raised a bunch of money. So through the course of doing that at the church, we raised about $1 million for our local homeless community. And so I heard that call from one of those 4,000 bosses to say, well, what about the people in our own backyard? And 100% we need to have eyes for people in our own backyard. But one of the things I didn't ever stop doing was mission work. And in 2010, in early January 2010, there's an earthquake that rocked Haiti, the most poverty-stricken country in the Western Hemisphere. And I felt this pull. And guys, we see things on the news all the time, and we see things on social media that we tune out. And I saw this 250,000 people dead in Haiti, and I'm like, I got to do something. And I mean, to honestly have the ego and the confidence and the naivety to think like I'm going to go make a difference. Realistically, the reason why we go and we serve is it's a very short-term service that we do there to provide long-term perspective for people like you and me. And so I brought down a group of people into Haiti. And one of the things that we did is we served at a place called the Son of God Orphanage in Carrefour, Haiti. And we walked into this place that had been ransacked by the earthquake. And there's 125 kids and like 2 staff members that are there. And these kids cling to us as though we are their hope to get out. I see a lot of people talking, right? And they're like, you know, it's so great that they love this kind of affection and attention. But my 6-year-old Simon, if he saw a stranger, he'd stay so far away from them and wouldn't want anything to do with them. And yet these kids see us, and it's not a cultural thing. It's they're trying to cling to hope. And I clung to these kids, and I loved on these kids. And when it was done, we spent about 3 or 4 days there. We had raised a lot of money to go on the trip, and we had about $4,000 extra. And I sat with the owner of the orphanage, and I gave him $4,000 cash. And through a translator, I prayed with him, and I'm like, man, please use this to help these kids. And I'm walking away, honestly, patting myself on the back, being like, Erik, way to go. You did a good thing. And 2 months later, across my desk came a story from a national publication that said the Son of God Orphanage in Carrefour, Haiti is corrupt. And of the 125 kids that were there were 50 or 60 that remained. The rest were either murdered for organ harvesting, or they were sold into the sex trade industry. These were kids that I had held and played with and laughed with and shared the love that I could with them, even for a short period of time. And there's something that happens when it becomes personal. And for me in 2010, it became personal. It became this thing to understand, like, oh my gosh, this isn't just a news story. This is a kid who I knew the name of. And this is a kid who I played tag with and all these other things. And so I was completely wrecked. It was at that same time I was transitioning from a full-time career in ministry into a full-time career into real estate. And all of a sudden, I made my first year in real estate, I made 5 times financially what I had made as a realtor, or excuse me, as I had made as a minister. And I'm like, what in the world am I supposed to do with this? The only thing I knew, I grew up without any male role models in my life. And the only thing I knew of business people was what I saw in movies, things that you see on Glengarry Glen Ross and Wolf of Wall Street and The Boiler Room. And I mean, these things that are like, I'm going to take advantage of people and I'm going to make as much money as possible. And it just felt so gross to me to live a life like that. I now had riches in my life, but it wasn't enough because I had purpose in my career and I needed to make sure that my business matched my passion. And so I had a chance to start over in my real estate career a couple of years after I was in it. And I had made some big mistakes and failed and fell on my face. And I got to rebuild. And I'm like, I got to build where I'm pouring into people. And I'm giving them everything I possibly can as a leader to help them to win. Their success would be my success. They weren't there to ride on my coattails. I formed a nonprofit with a good friend in Portland, Oregon. And this nonprofit is called Sell a Home, Save a Child. And we literally wanted our businesses to have more purpose than just accumulation of wealth for us. And so we wanted our businesses to fund saving kids around the world. There are kids that were in the sex trade industry and living in garbage dumps, and their families would have to sell them just to get first pick of the dump. And my friend Nick experienced that in Nicaragua, and it became so personal for him, just like it was personal for me. And so we shared this voice, and we encouraged people from around the world to give through their real estate earnings, give a portion of their commission or a portion of what they've made as a title company or a mortgage officer, that they would give to support this. And we've raised about $3 million from that. So fast forward to most recently, I have a dear friend who lives in Fargo with me. His name is Than Bartson, and he runs a ministry. It's not a ministry, but for me, it's still a ministry, but it's a nonprofit called Unseen, and they're fighting human trafficking and their root causes. And my buddy Than comes to me with all of these stories that will rip your heart out to the core. And I've just used this now to say, man, this is personal because I care about those kids in Haiti from 13 years ago. Nick cared about those kids in Nicaragua, and I care about Than, and I see that he's doing great good. And for me, I want my voice to be so loud, and I want my calling to be so clear that we have to understand that this life is more than accumulation. This life is found when you give it away. Your greatness comes when you support other people. And so human trafficking in its root causes feel like I'm picturing my daughter in that situation, my 8-year-old Finley, and it wrecks me just to even fathom that or to think about that. And so I have a voice as a realtor and as a guy who is running a coaching company trying to influence people. And it's not about how you can get more. It's about how you can make a better difference in this world. And human trafficking is the voice that we are leading people towards to understand that there is a lot of darkness in the world. And this world is not going to be saved by politics. And it's not going to be saved by nonprofits. It's going to be saved by Andrew and Mike and Eric getting off our heinies and doing some great good and using our voice, because this is a bottom-up movement. It's not top-down.
Preach, brother. Thanks for filling us in on the context, and just your passion is really coming through, Eric. So I just want to reflect that to you. What would you say to somebody who might say, this sounds interesting, but what can I do? Or that sounds interesting, but is that really a big problem? I think a bigger problem is, something else, right? Climate change, or, it is politics, or it's, some other cause, right? Besides human trafficking. Do you have anything to say to that?
There's I think 3 or 4 types of categories of things that people get fired up for. There's institutions. So you think about colleges and churches and that sort, where people are supporting something that was really important to them. There's kids that get people really fired up. There's poverty that gets people fired up. And there's pets that get people fired up. And then there's politics too, right? So if I put kind of those 5 things together, and maybe I'm missing a couple of categories, but usually it falls into some sort of injustice within those, or it's an institution that you're passionate about. I don't care what you like. It doesn't need to be human trafficking. one of my favorite authors is a man named Shane Claiborne, and he writes in his book, The Irresistible Revolution, that the greatest problem with the world today is not the global AIDS pandemic, and it's not human trafficking, and it's not poverty issues that we see. The greatest problem facing our world today are the SUVs and picket fences that are keeping the haves from the have-nots. And so I don't know, and I really don't need to decipher what your passion needs to be. I just am craving a world where people are more passionate, not with being keyboard warriors and being just voices of flap. And we have our time, our talents, and our treasures to give. And when I was broke, I gave a lot of my time. And now I have some influence, and I'm using my voice. And I have some cash and I'm using my money, and I'm also using my time, right? And so regardless of whatever your calling is, and for me, human trafficking feels personal. From what I experienced in Haiti to my connection with Than now, my family and I are planning a trip to Thailand here in January, and my kids and my wife are going to get exposed to this world that is really, really dark. Because I am, this is a side topic, but I am so friggin' worried about raising spoiled brats. And I grew up with one foot in the welfare bucket, and I'm proudly trailer trash. And I didn't have the opportunities that my kids have now. And I'll be damned if these kids aren't going to experience some plight in the world. And I'm not going to force them into poverty, but we need to be exposed to. We need to get rid of the SUVs and picket fences, and we need to become in our face, understanding that this world desperately needs us.
Well, what's immediately showing up for me, Eric, is we were at Front Row Dad Live, and Rich Christensen talked about rites of passages for his kids. And one of the things of that he's done with his kids is getting them exposed to real poverty and real situations that are happening in the world around us. And I love that. My son is only 2.5, so we haven't gotten to the whole rites of passage yet. I know Andrew recently
you're
did.
exposing him to Bluey right now.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Doing the bum shuffle.
That's right.
So so I want to just click on that, but I wanted to circle back to one thing that I said this to my wife. It sounded so silly, but I'm going to bring it to the space because I think it's relevant. When I was growing up, there were moments as a kid where I would just sit in my room and I would be in like a temper tantrum mood. I don't know how old I was, but I'd be like, man, if I got kidnapped right now, I would be brought to a new home that just would treat me better. It'd be like, this family sucks, and kidnapping means that a new family is going to treat me better than my current family. Maybe I should just go out there and sit out in public and get kidnapped, and maybe I'll be treated with more respect. Like, that was my disillusionment as a young kid of what it meant to be kidnapped. And when I watched The Sound of Freedom, and when I went down these deep dives and hearing these horrific things that are incomprehensible. And I know you just said about selling organs and these baby factories and what they're doing, and like this sex trade, and a little boy could be turned several times in one day. I mean, this type of inhumane. I can't even think of the word right now, but I wanted to get your take on some of this. I mean, Tim Ballard I would love to have a conversation with him, but you're going to be the closest that I have at this second in time to hear your take on anything, whether it be from the movie or from just, I'd like to hear, like, what would you say from what you experienced and what you saw and seeing the movie, The Sound of Freedom, I don't even know what the question is underneath here, but how can you dispel my childhood naiveness of what it means to be kidnapped and what actually is happening to these kids from your lens of what you experienced or what you saw or from the movie? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It wrecks me to even go there in intentional time, because I want to tie everything together when it becomes personal, when it's someone you know instead of a nameless face or a faceless name, however you want to look at that. And I put my daughter in that situation. Imagine we're an impoverished family and we have no idea how we're going to make ends meet. And somebody comes knocking at the door, and my mom and my dad are starving to death. And my parents have to sell my sister. And they say, well, I'm going to sell my sister for $30. And she may go into slavery, which is such a huge problem. I mean, there's over 50 million people trafficked right now. Like this issue is larger today than it ever has been in the history of our world. But 10 million of those trafficked people are kids. And so imagine my sister or my daughter is sold into what we believe is slavery. But all of a sudden, there are perverse people from around the world that are coming to have sex with her 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a day, an 8-year-old kid. And it's so disturbing to know the darkness that's out there. And so you try to look at that to say, well, where do you rectify the issue? Is it with the person that's paying the $5? And literally it's shockingly inexpensive. You know, drugs are the number one dark money maker in the world. It used to be firearms at number 2, but you can only sell a firearm one time. Drugs are an addiction, just like for so many, sex is an addiction, and you can sell a person over and over and over and over and over again. So these kids are impoverished and they're hidden behind the shadows. And this is happening in the United States, it's happening in second world countries, third world countries. It's all over. The perverseness that's out there is gut wrenching. And so, Mike, to your question, like right now I'm left saying, well, do we go after the traffickers? Do you just try to rescue the kids? Do you try to change the mindset of people that are out there? And the answer is yes. The problem is so vast. It's so widespread, and it's this hidden darkness that's out there right now. And so I think what Sound of Freedom does well is it brings light to the darkness. Now, of course, it's a Hollywood production. There are liberties taken. There are corners cut. And so I'm not here to give you a review of the movie, but I am here to give you a voice and give myself a voice to say, I can't sit idly by anymore. And I think that so many people who've watched that movie are left saying, so now what? And I have to tell you, this is my friend Than shares this with me, is that a trafficker is more likely to get struck by lightning than to get persecuted for their crimes. And that is a cause for pause. And so for me, I'm trying to grow a business that's large enough in which I can fund literally hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to help fight human trafficking. To eliminate these traffickers from what they're doing, to put them behind bars, to prosecute them for their crimes. Things shouldn't be in the dark anymore, and I love that the Sound of Freedom has brought this to the forefront. So the action here is so now what? And I think that for people that have money and availability, there are some really, really good organizations out there that are taking those dollars and using them so wisely. Please do your research before you donate, whether it be with what you saw with Tim Ballard or with Unseen. I'd encourage you to do your research before you give your money. That's such an important step to do. Once you've done that, there is a quietness after the movie, because here's what happens. Is you see something like that and it wrecks you, right? Mike, I imagine it wrecked you when you saw that. And then we go back to our SUVs and our picket fences, and we are maybe having it in casual conversation. But usually when something hits us, and this is my own personal mantra here, so this is not clinically proven. This is not what I stole from somebody else. If I don't take action within like 12 hours, it's not going to happen. If I go to a seminar, if I read a book, if I don't immediately put something into momentum, it doesn't happen. I remember how I started Sell a Home, Save a Child with my buddy Nick. I was at a Christian concert, a band called Casting Crowns. And I'm listening to the lead singer, and he's talking about what, like when you watch Braveheart in the movie theater and everybody puffs their chest up and they're like, yeah, I can conquer the world. I can do anything. And then he said, I don't think we're called to be the people that sit in the seats. We're called to be the person that gets in the fight. And I immediately turned to my buddy. I'm like, I see it. I know it. I got to do it. And I texted Nick right there. I'm like, I'm flying out to Portland next week and we're going to figure this out. And I took action. Even if it's not the right action, it's better than just sitting idly by. And so for those that are listening to this, and maybe it's human trafficking, maybe it's something else, but your greatest joys in life will come from the action you take and not the inaction that you process for too dang long. And so if something right now feels like, I got to do something, literally schedule it, make the call, send the text, and take action to start making movement in the right direction. Otherwise, I think 12 hours later, it's gone. At least for me, it is.
So good. Thank you, Erik. I'm really enjoying, these directions, and it just reminds me of that man in the arena quote, right? Roosevelt, of just, hey, the glory, right? All the failure and all the success belongs to the man in the arena, not the people in the crowds. And so, listener, get into the arena. You may be bruised and bloodied and scarred, but it's way better than being in the stands, right? Being a spectator of your entire life. And I just want to reflect to you, Erik, that I sense that that's what you've done. I love the energy and passion that you're bringing to this, and you're also bringing it to business because, to your other point around building a business large enough to make an impact, making enough money so that I have something to give, that I could actually be substantial with, and might actually create long-lasting legacy and create the ripples of change that we're looking to create. Because growing up, kind of similar to what you were sharing, I didn't necessarily think of business people as the most altruistic. And yet every single person that I admire today who's making a real impact in the world is a business owner, kind of almost exclusively, not entirely, but obviously there's exceptions. But I feel like people who are making the biggest impact are entrepreneurial in nature. And I'm curious from your perspective, because you have you've sold over 6,500 homes in the last decade. You've built this real estate empire, and you've done it through leadership. How do you bring those lessons, into everyday life, into the leadership of your team? And, you talk about leadership, failure, vulnerability, developing others. What are some of the key principles there around leadership that you practice on a daily basis?
So guys, the reason why we're talking is because of Front Row Dads. And I'm not in Front Row Dads, but one of my dearest partners and former team members is a guy named Kyle Reedstrom, who's in Front Row Dads. And Kyle got me on a podcast for his buddy Matt. Matt, I think, recommended me to you. And so here we are tying it all together. And I want to tell you the story of Kyle. And I talk about it in my book. Here's a shameless humble brag number one, is I wrote a book in 2019 called Play for the Person Next to You. It's a servant leadership guide. And I want to give it away to your audience for free. And so if they want a copy of it, find me on Instagram, Real Erik Hatch. That's Erik with a K, Real Erik Hatch. And just DM me one word. You just need to DM me the word leadership. And we'll give you instructions from there on how to get a free copy. You just pay shipping and handling. So again, Real Erik Hatch on Instagram, just DM me the word leadership. So after that shameless plug, here's Kyle's story. And I talk about it in the book. Is Kyle came to me when he was, I think, 26 years old. And he started with me in his real estate career and all of a sudden found really great success. And so he's looking at the world saying, what do I do with this success? And he had the same heart as I think we all do. And that is, we want to be generous. We want to set an example for our communities, for our team members, for the world, that we are to live big lives and we are to do great things with it. And he wanted to be great in giving. And so he said, Erik, I want to figure out a plan of when I'm 30 years old, I want to donate $100,000. Like, imagine the life that you have to have as a 26-year-old to have the perspective to be like, when I'm 30, I want to donate $100,000. And I challenged him. I'm like, Kyle, first of all, I love that, but how about we don't have you run a marathon just one time, and instead we train for the marathon and you stretch your limits and your capacities. And so we made a plan that when he was 27, he would donate 10,000. When he was 28, he would donate 30,000. When he was 29, he'd donate 60. And when he was 30, he'd donate 100. So altogether, that's $200,000 by the time he's 30. He's like, hell yeah, I'm going to do that. And so he figured out a plan in which his own money and then money that he would help to raise would accumulate to follow that plan. And he did it. And I think that right there is the lesson that many of us fail to see. The lesson is not in the generosity. And the lesson is not in the fact that Kyle had to live a life so big that he could donate that much money and influence enough people to donate that much money. The lesson is in the business plan. And I think that most of us, even my Christian faith tells me that I'm to tithe 10%. Now, and you're first to give to God what is God's. So you're to first give your 10%. But I think most of us give our 10% at the end. Like we give of our leftovers. We give of the things that are extra to the world. And my buddy Than, who runs Unseen, said to me, like, hey, we have this big event coming up and we're going to put you as a sponsor. Do you know how much you and your wife are going to give this year? Because we want to put you at the silver or the gold or the platinum sponsor level. And I said, well, this is a tough year for me. Financially, the real estate market is down and I'm transitioning with a lot of things. And I had to make a bunch of layoffs and all these things that come with the complications of being a business owner and an entrepreneur. And so my response to him, didn't sit well with me, but my first response was, I have to wait to see how much I have at the end of the year to know how much I can give. And then I didn't sleep that night because that's not who I want to be in this world. Of the leadership lessons that I want to give to people, of the coaching and the insight is I need to have a vision for my life that I'm working towards instead of just finding these things that are happenstance. I want to be the most generous person I know. That's a weird thing it's a weird flex, but it's the flex I'm going to make is I want to be the most generous person I know of my time, of my energy, of my riches that I have. I want to be the person that gives away everything to inspire and uplift. And if I am doing that, that means I have to have a plan and I have to know how hard I have to work and how much I have to make so that I can cut a check that is jarring to me. There's a story of this old lady who goes into her deep freezer in her basement and sees that her turkey that's in the bottom of the deep freeze has been there 20 or 30 years, covered in frost and everything else. She scratches it off and sees it's a Genio turkey. So she dials 1-800-GENIO and she asks the operator, like, say, this freezer in my basement has stored a turkey for 30 years. And it's a Genio turkey. And I'm wondering, is it still edible? And the operator says, well, has it stayed frozen the entire time? She's like, yep, it stayed frozen the entire time. And the lady said, well, the operator said, well, it's going to be pretty flavorless and it's going to be pretty dry, but yes, it's still edible. And the old lady said, well, great, I'll donate it to church then. And I think so many of us are doing that with our lives is we're donating like the things that we don't want, the clothing that's in the back of our closet, the food that we're not going to eat, the stuff that is flavorless and everything else. But I think this world is craving something that's really good and flavorful. Our table needs to be big enough that the least of these have a seat at it. And so for Kyle, as such an inspiration to me, as a guy that donated $200,000 in the course of 4 years, I think that that's the leadership lesson I want to hopefully instill to your listeners and to the people that I have the privilege of impacting. And that is, we have to have a plan for our life and a vision for our life that is so abundant and so generous that we are trying to figure out how hard do I have to work to make that impact instead of what leftovers do I have to give at the end.
Well, Erik, I wish I met you before we had Kyle Reedstrom on the podcast because we could have totally gotten to that story, but we focus so much on tactical of investment strategies and creating passive income. So listener,
those are all vehicles, right? Those are all vehicles
Correct.
so that he can live this life of generosity.
I agree. Listener, check out Kyle Reedstrom's episode. But I mean, it was really good content under the umbrella of the tactical, which is kind of an inspiration to my question for you under this umbrella of tactical. I mean, you have a 30-person real estate team. You have sold over 6,500 homes. And I would love to have you riff on some tactical items, specifically scaling a 30-person team or delivering, an average of 650 homes a year from your team that you're able to sell. So, I don't know what best practice is when it comes to your whether it be your weekly communication with your team, best practices with your follow up with your clients. I think a lot of people in real estate have trouble with follow ups with their clients. So maybe if you want to riff on that, I'm sure a lot of this is in your real estate, the perfect real estate blueprint. Real estate agent blueprint book that we obviously could talk about at the end. But if you could just give us maybe some tactical on leading that 30-person team strategy, whether it be meetings or plannings or whatever you do there, and then any tactical with follow up or execution or some of the big challenges that maybe some agents face when it comes to delivering 650 homes as a team in a year.
So I started my real estate career as a solo agent. And when I got really good at selling, I did what everybody thinks they're supposed to do, and that is to start a team. And the illusion is when you hire a bunch of people, you think it's going to make you more money and get you time back. But it was the exact inverse of that. It made me less money because I got away from where my sweet spot was. And I lost all my time trying to help the wrong hires grow into who I hoped that they would be. And so I got the gift of starting over in 2013 after it all blew up in my face. And I had a chance to do it right the second time. And I recognized that everything I wanted in life was going to be so long as I had the right people in my life. And Kyle Reedstrom was one of those people. And so whatever it is you're looking to build, whether it be within real estate or any other sort of business, it is always who, not how, which is one of my favorite books. And the idea is when you get the right people in your environment who have the same viewpoint, who have the same perspective on life, and they're willing to sacrifice their time and their energy to follow a blueprint in order to help them to be successful. Well, that's the path that I wanted to go down. And that's what we started doing in 2013. That's how Kyle came into my world is we were arduous in following a process of making sure we had the right people. Our greatest mistakes are never improper money spent. It's always been the wrong people coming in. I love the movie Caddyshack, and there's the scene in Caddyshack where all the caddies have like 20 minutes and they just take over the pool. And there's the Baby Ruth scene where the guy's eating the candy bar and throws it in the water, and somebody sees it as a turd. It's not even a turd. They just see it as a perceived turd, and everybody runs from there. Like you can have 100,000 gallons of crystal clear, pure, clean, chlorinated water, but you put one turd in there and you just have shitty water and it's all infected. And that's what's happening with anybody's team is you can have something so great, but you put one turd in there and it's ruined for everyone. And so the greatest successes I found amidst all the giant failures have been finding the right key people. Now, once we have the right people, we have to understand that we have to have three things in order. At the base of everything that we do, we have to have clear-cut standards. These are, you gotta be this, you have to follow these rules, you have to be this type of person, you have to follow this rhythm just in order to be in our world. What's unique about realtors is that they're almost all independent contractors, and so they want to do things their way. Well, if you want to be on my team, yes, you're an independent contractor, and you have to agree to meet those standards in order to have the privilege of being on my team. And so those clear-cut standards are traditionally around daily metrics. Those daily metrics are around role-playing and practicing, are around lead generation, and are around lead follow-up. And then work within our CRM as well. You have to hit all those metrics just in order to maintain your job. Now, I know for certain that when somebody follows that blueprint, that their goals are going to be much more achievable. So at the base of these three is standards. That's what we build everything upon. But Andrew, if I say to you, hey man, you got to make your 20 calls today. And if you don't make your 20 calls, you don't have a job. I'm not confident that that inspires you and gets you excited. And so above standards are goals. These are your personal goals, Andrew. These are your personal commitments. And your goals have to at least meet the standard, but 99 times out of 100, they will exceed our standard. If you hold my old coach, Steve, says, if you hold somebody accountable to your goals, they'll resent you. But if you hold them accountable to their goals, they'll thank you. And so there's a heavy level of accountability in my ecosystem with what we've built, how we've built. That accountability is always not around the standard, it's around the goal. I need to know what's important to you, Andrew. I need to know why those numbers are important, and I need to have a clear understanding of what the daily commitment needs to be. Now, if you don't have an understanding of that, it's really difficult to try to motivate you and excite you and remind you of why you do what you do. There's so much noise that's out there. And this is where leadership really shows up, is that leadership is not a one size fits all. It's a customized journey. Because Mike, what you want is different than what Andrew wants. And so if I'm going to be a great coach and mentor for you, which is my greatest value proposition that I have, is, hey, you got a guy who's been around the block a couple of times, and I'm here to help you get to your goals faster. And Andrew and Mike, you want different things. And so I cannot do a one size fits all. I have to know exactly what it is that each of you want personally, and what obstacles are in the way and how we're going to get there. So above all of that, we have standards on the base. We have goals at the middle. At the top of that are expectations. And that word expectations is bizarre because I can Google the word expectations. I, in fact, remember getting prepared to do a talk for a group. And so I Googled quotes on expectations. And here's what I found. Lower your expectations so people won't let you down. And don't have high expectations. Nobody's ever going to meet it. And I just felt like, I don't want to live in that world. Like I'm a former youth pastor and camp counselor. And like I would tell kids, hey, Andrew, I think you can go and change the world, man. Whatever you want to do, I think you're going to be great at. And as a parent, I instill that in my kids too. And they're dumb enough to believe me. And I don't mean dumb as a lack of intelligence. They just haven't been burned by the world like our old butts have been burned. And so because we haven't been burned by because those kids haven't been burned by the world, I talk about possibilities instead of impossibilities. I talk about achievements and what they can become instead of what they can't. And so that's my language that I use as the umbrella to talk about goals and to talk about standards. Is I'm not going to let you settle for what you think you're possible of achieving. I want you to know that I see something special in you, and you can't bullcrap that. Like you can't just pour into someone and say I see this greatness in you if you haven't taken the time to hire right, and if you haven't got somebody that you believe can be an 11 out of 10. And so everything I do from leadership, from showing up for people, is I want to talk about possibilities, and I want to talk about achieving their dreams and then some, and what we can do, because we're always going to be better together.
Whew. Erik, you are preaching today, man. Thank you so much. Standards, goals, expectations, and just the inspiration, right, that you're bringing, along with grounded business principles, right? So it's like, hey, this is how we operate. You know, you have your daily metrics, you have your role playing, you have your lead gen, you have your lead follow up. You know, we're going to hit these things, but ultimately it's about way more than that. It's about speaking possibilities, about seeing possibilities, it's about reaching and achieving your goals, your dreams, tailoring the leadership style to that person. I mean, just so many nuggets there, man. So thanks for going on that epic leadership rant, brother. I appreciate it. And listener, if you haven't taken up Erik yet on the offer to go onto Instagram and type leadership in the DMs to him, at real Erik Hatch with Erik with a K. I highly recommend it because the book is going to reflect that to you as well, and it's absolutely free to take him up on that offer. You mentioned parenting. I wanted to ask you a parenting question, if you don't mind here, Erik.
You got it.
I got to imagine that being Finley and Simon is probably a pretty cool thing in the Hatch household. And, my hypothesis is that they're probably getting, some of the best parenting out there. I know no one's ever perfect as a parent, but Erik, I'm curious, as you're bringing these leadership principles into the household, into how you're raising your family and being a family man. What would you say, in terms of your best tips for raising this next generation of leaders who are ready and willing to make a difference, and, preparing them for the world, but also not, jading them too much, but, at the same time, making them aware of some of the challenges that are out there. How do you do it? And what are some of the recommendations that you have for me, Mike and for our listeners?
So it's hard to talk about parenting without talking about your own parents. And we, of course, have that lens in which we see things. And so when I was 2 years old, my parents divorced. My dad was a alcoholic, a drug dealer, a drug addict, and left my family at the age of 2. And so I was raised by a single parent mom with one foot in the welfare bucket. I was and am proudly trailer trash. And so as we grew up and as we found our way, when I was 16 years old, my mom got diagnosed with cancer, stage 4 cancer. She lived 5 more years and then died when I was 21. So I was orphaned at the age of 21. And I got to tell you, people thought, and I thought at that time, that losing a parent was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And I think it was at that moment in that time, but it was actually the rejection of my father, which was the slow fade every day, that hurt and still hurts so much more than the loss of my loved one. And the role my dad played in my life is the most powerful thing that determines how I show up as a parent today. And perhaps the pendulum has swung quite a bit, but to have that absentee father was the greatest gift I was given, because now I get to be the present father, because I understood what it was like to look around and not have that unbelievable role model and that person in my life who just cared. Now, my dad would show up every 2 or 3 years with like a $2 bill and take me out for dinner. And he didn't have much either. But I think that absentee dads and moms too, but absentee dads from the perspective that I know, try to buy their way into a lot of things. I haven't shown up for a few months, or I'm not engaged, and so I'm going to take you on this vacation, or I'm going to buy you this thing, and that's going to make up for the lost time. And even within my real estate team, as I've gone to build other things and pursue other passions, I've unintentionally become an absentee father. And so I've tried to gift them with experiences and gift them with like really great commission splits, when really all they ever wanted was dad. Now, I don't think they come out and say that, because they're like, I still want the money, I still want the experiences. And yet I understand the core of how people think. Now, Simon, who's 6, and Finley, who's 8, they don't get my leftovers, just as I talked about with my business plan. They get my first, they get my primary. That's what I work towards, is everything else takes shape around them. So I make sure that my experiences with my kids are a 10 out of 10. I make sure that my time with my kids is a 10 out of 10. Yes, I travel a lot for work. I'm on the road 10 to 15 days a month, and they get all of me when I'm here, and when I'm gone, they get a whole lot of screen time with me still. And I have such an amazing wife that supports me on that also. So I say all of this to come to your question, Andrew, of what parenting advice or how is my leadership pouring into these kids? And they are the priority that everything else falls around, instead of the leftovers that I have at the end of the day or the end of the year. My wife, who's been an educator for 17 years, taught 1st and 3rd grade, just stepped away from teaching because of this exact reason. She felt like she was giving everything she had to her kids in her classroom, and when she came home, she didn't have a full cup to give. Her coach says this is, imagine a cup is sitting on a saucer. Most of us say we have to have a full cup in order to pour into other people. And her coach says, you actually don't even pour from your cup. You pour from your saucer. You can only give to others what is your overflow, because that cup is for you. And so I need to make sure that in my life, I have not just a full cup, but I have a saucer of extra left over, ready to give to my kids, to my spouse, to my God, and to everything else. But I got to fill up my cup first, which is why this morning, even though I hate it, I got up early and worked out, and which is why I spend time meditating, which is why I spend time in prayer before I give anything to the rest of the world. Because if I don't fill myself up, I got nothing else to give.
I love that you tied a bow with that because one of the curiosities is showing up. It's like, cool, that sounds good in theory. How do you make sure that you fill up your own cup so that way it spills over? So I love the exercise, meditation, breath work, probably journaling, reading, learning, all of those might fall into that same vein. And I will say you kind of hit home with me, Erik, because I witnessed my dad, 6 days a week. He's 82 years old. He still works right now he owns his own plumbing business 6 days a week. And he works so much. He missed the basketball games and missed those events that I would have loved him to be at. And when he was when he was with us, he was always so tired that a lot of times during the trips and whatnot, he was kind of disengaged a little bit. So partially why I hired my first coach, which was Andrew Biggs, and hired him to help me run a better business. So that way, when I stepped into marriage and when I stepped into fatherhood, I could be more present with my wife and with my future family, and learning everything I learned from Andrew and from mentors in my life of business systems and how to leverage automation and delegation. Hence, what we teach with automation, delegation, systemization with our community and operator to owner and leveraging virtual assistant services. Like all of that came from the inspiration of how can I be a more present father and husband and man for my family, and also contributor to my community, and leverage the business as a vehicle that doesn't necessarily need to consume my time. And how could I be free from that while making sure it creates revenue, and then taking that money and then putting the money to work where the money creates more revenue, and then taking this money and then contributing to the growth of our legacy and giving back. So I really, truly appreciate how you approached this conversation, how much inspiration you gave to me. And I'm sure anybody who's listening to this as well. So just truly, truly grateful for you, Erik. And we like to ask every guest before we end each episode 3 questions. And the first question that we'd like to ask you today is, what do you think the world needs most today?
I think we touched upon that a little bit in terms of the example I used with Shane Claiborne, where we talked about the picket fences and the SUVs that are keeping us from the world. I think this world is, as a gross, overgeneralized statement, is pretty apathetic. And to jump from apathy to empathy is usually too big a jump. It really is. So my encouragement for people is, if you're apathetic and you don't care about X, Y, or Z, move to sympathy. Because I think those are the 3 things. You go from apathy to sympathy, sympathy to empathy. And I think that most of us, if we can look at something with a situation with the intent to understand, instead of the intent to criticize or judge or cast blame to. I'll use this as an example. Through my time at the church, I spent a lot of time working with homeless people locally. There's a man named John who became one of my most invested folks. And John was a chronically homeless person and a massive alcoholic who couldn't ever shake it. And John, from society's standpoint, was unbelievably toxic. He was really tough to love. It was, I'll spare you all the details, but John's mom died, and I went with John to his mom's funeral. And his entire family wouldn't even say a word to him. And so we oftentimes look at the Johns of the world, and John has since passed away, unfortunately, but we look at the Johns of the world as bums and as alcoholics and as leeches on society. And sometimes that is a true narrative. But John was also someone who was outcast by his family, whether it was by his own doing. And let's be honest, it was by his own doing, by his own choices. But alcoholism is really tricky. I am a gambling addict. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm a gambling addict. And I understand the layers and the complexity. And the way I got out of that was I was surrounded by a really strong wife and a really great church that uplifted me and supported me to get clean on that. And maybe John didn't have those resources, or maybe he even did, but he was so broken he couldn't. I hope you see what I'm trying to get at here. Is like, we can look with just judgment and harshness, but if we can look with some sympathy, that sympathy will give us at least an understanding that this world is really gray. It's not black and white. And when we show up with a little more understanding, it usually will lead to the action that I'm hoping people will take in order to start doing some good in the world.
Such a good reflection there, Erik, and a very nuanced take. So I appreciate that. The second question that we always ask our guests is, what 1 to 3 books do you think everyone should check out? I know you've recommended Who Not How already, but what other books do you think people should check out?
So my favorite book that I've read in the last couple of years is called The Gap and the Gain. And it is such I see you guys smiling. The Gap and the Gain has such a great perspective on how to view your life. And I think that most of us, when we feel progression in our life, when we feel like we're actually taking steps and getting closer to the goal, even though there's that large gap of where we still want to be, that serves as a massive motivator. So that is such a great mindset book for me. My favorite leadership book is Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. And such a powerful testimony of how leaders need to make sure that they're serving other people. I'm of the belief, and I'm flirting with my third book here. And if it's going to be a leadership book, again, it's going to be called Leaders Go First, which is this idea that we have to be action takers, this idea that we have to step out into the uncomfortable because the world needs leaders more now than ever before. The third book is a book that, in fact, my podcast is starting to take shape on. I have a podcast that I'm launching right now called Redefine, and it's about redefining how people treat people. And so I'm highlighting business owners and entrepreneurs, but I'm looking at their plight story. How do they get to become these unbelievable success stories? Well, let's look at the pain that they went through and the hardships that they experienced. And it's all based on a book by Keith Cunningham called The Road Less Stupid. And The Road Less Stupid paints a really great picture of our success will be by doing dumb things less. And so I think this world needs to hear about those dumb things that all of us have made as mistakes. And this world doesn't need people to beat their chest and say, I'm great. I think this world is far better served when people say, hey, here's all my struggles, here's all my flaws. I think that's far more beautiful. And what we should be showing as leaders is the brokenness, not the wholeness.
Those are great ones. The Road Less Stupid, Keith Cunningham has the best questions in that book. Like, it is just filled with some of the best questions that you could get. And I love some Dan Sullivan. So great recommendations there. Love that. Our third question for you, Erik, before you could tell us how to stay in touch with you, is what does it mean to you to be better than rich?
So I grew up without money, and then I got a bunch of money, and it felt really empty. And so I think that there's a difference between rich and wealthy. Rich is an abundance of money. But I think I know a lot of people that are rich and poor at the same time. They're poor of community. They're poor of relationships. They're poor of their time. And so for me, wealth is an accumulation of those three things. It's stuff, it's resources, it's the right relationships, and it's the right time. And you can't be wealthy unless you have all three of those. Otherwise, I think you're poor. I don't think you're rich.
So good. Thanks again, Erik. This has been amazing. I am certain that our listeners are going to want to stay in touch with you. If they want to learn more, maybe if you want to, again, give the directions on how to get that free book. I think that's an amazing offer. Thanks for being so generous with the listeners. But where can they learn more and how can they stay in touch with you?
Instagram is probably the easiest way. That's where all the kids are. So I'm very hip and trendy with those little whippersnappers. Real Erik Hatch. That's Erik with a K, Real Erik Hatch. And if you are interested in getting a copy of Play for the Person Next to You, my servant leadership book, just DM me one word, and that word is leadership, and you'll get instructions on how you can get a free copy. You just pay shipping and handling.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. And obviously you mentioned the podcast that's coming out. Is there a date that you said you're going to be starting that? Or is it just an idea?
It launches end of August.
End of August.
We're batching some episodes right now. So yeah, it's on its way.
Excellent. Well, we definitely appreciate that. That you're continuing to share your message. And I really think it's a great concept, by the way, because the learning from people's pitfalls or those plights, as you mentioned, that's where a lot of that fruit is. And it's very relatable for those that sometimes are stuck in those valleys. So love that you're taking on that project and that initiative. Thank you so much for bringing it today, Erik. Andrew, as always, thank you for your insightful questions. And listener, thank you for tuning in. And as always, if this episode helped you, please share it with a friend. If you're checking us out on Apple or Spotify, go over to YouTube. We have a bunch of shorts. So on YouTube with highlight moments, there's some extra bonus clips and features on YouTube. So you could go over there. And we always appreciate the ratings and reviews on Apple. And as you always know, we are here to serve you where we can. So remember, leave today better than you found it. And we'll see you next time. Have a great one.